I'm an architect. I've been practicing for almost 30, well, almost 40 odd years, and I run my own practice in Karachi. Uh, and over the last 6 years or so, I've been very involved with the mangroves and the delta of Pakistan. Uh, by accident, by choice, both together. मगर इन्वायरमेंट और इकोलॉजी का इंटरेस्ट और फोकस मेरे करियर में हमेशा से ही रहा है। शुरू में तो मैंग्रोव्स में जब गया था, तो मैं अभी आर्किटेक्चर के बारे में ज़्यादा नहीं बात करूँगा। जो मैं अभी काम कर रहा हूँ, उस किस्म के, उस नौइयत के काम उठा रहा हूँ जिसमें माहौलियाती क्या कहते हैं, वज़न थोड़ा ज़्यादा हो, और जिन प्रोजेक्ट्स पे प्लांटेशन, एनवायरनमेंट, वाटर एज वेल एज green economics shamil hoon. I'm not a great believer in the leads process, but I am a very firm believer in green buildings at the grassroots level. Whatever, that's a different falsafana guftagoo hai, wo mukhtalif. Magar मैंग्रोव्स में शुरू में तो बहुत मज़ा आ रहा था और बड़ी खुशी से तस्वीरें ले रहा था, बड़ी लिखत पढ़त कर रहा था उसके ऊपर। फिर कटाई इतनी नज़र आती है कि शर्मिंदगी हो रही थी कि अगर उसके बारे में कुछ किया ना जाए। तो पिछले 5-6 साल से मेरी एक मुहिम चली हुई है, बहुत ही छोटे से पैमाने पे, कि मैं इस कटाई को अगर काटने से ख़त्म या रोक नहीं सकता, तो कम से कम लोगों को इसकी खबर तो पहुँचा दूँ। So I've spent the last few years communicating with a very large number of people. The audience has been about 2,000 people every Sunday, who industrialists, who are bureaucrats, who are officials in the forces and the politicians. And it was going to, the messages were going to the highest level on all of their things. And that was the target. Plus, I would encourage my friends who were getting it to forward it and post it. So social media, even though it wasn't dealt with as a mass media, but it was focused upon a targeted audience. I needed Imran to get to it. I needed the top of the brass. I needed the top of the politicians. And it got there. It got to most of these places. Did anyone do anything about it? I got a lot of respect. I got a lot of accolades. But no one did anything on the ground, which was expected. But Mangroves is a conversation. Mangroves is a very focal point. And, these trees of the delta are now being conversed about in the northern areas, in the mountains also of Pakistan. So that's a big thing. The other achievement that we were able to manage was that the Time magazine picked up this story. So their Oceans issue in 2022, July 2022, has an 8-page cover on on my journey in the mangroves. So when you look at that and when you see my documentary, वो वाज़ेह हो जाएंगी चीज़ें। तो आप लोगों को मैंने ये डॉक्यूमेंट्री एज लिंक भेजा है जानबूझ के मेरे यूट्यूब लिंक पे। आप इसको लिंक को प्लीज़ सेव कर लीजिएगा और उसको देख लीजिएगा खुद भी। अभी भी दिखा देंगे, इस पे गुफ्तगू भी कर लेंगे। तो पहली वाली जो डॉक्यूमेंट्री है वो 5 मिनट की है। That was made by Aaron Baker of the Time magazine. She spent 10 days with me. She was sent specifically to Pakistan to spend 10 days with me in my office, in the mangroves, on the streets. and she filmed. Photographer was sent for 5 or 6 days, Matthew Paley. He is a National Geographic photographer. He was sent to take photographs of the mangroves and film and document me and my story. So that in itself was a big boost. It was a surprise. They picked up the story. They called me, and I thought it would be a tiny little blurb. कि छोटा सा जो बॉक्स होता है ना मैगजीन में एक पेज के अंदर 2 इंच बाय 3 इंच का, उन्होंने 8 पेज लिख दिया इस पे मुझे बताए बगैर. तो उससे पैगाम को बहुत बूस्ट मिला और गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान took attention of it and asked me to speak at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And so I was asked to make a film, and I was asked, Tariq, we've done very good work, and we would like to tell the good story too. And so I said, no, there's no doubt about it. शक ही नहीं है कि काम बहुत अच्छा हुआ है, मगर उधर अच्छा हुआ है जो कराची से बहुत दूर है, बहुत दूर दराज इलाकों में. जो करीबी इलाके हैं कराची के, जिनमें हमें जंगलात की शदीद ज़रूरत है, वो कट रहे हैं. वो कट इसीलिए रहे हैं कि डेवलपमेंट का प्रेशर है और ज़मीन की कीमत ज़्यादा है. Who and how can you fight against money? But you have to, or profit. So I was asked to tell the good story about Pakistan, which is the right thing to do, because ये जो जिद्दोजहद होती है, ये जो जंग समझ रहे हैं आप, ये हमें अपने मुल्क में अपनी ज़मीन पे खुद करनी चाहिए, अपने लोगों के साथ. अपने मुल्क की शक्ल को पलीद करना या उसके ऊपर उसको कालक फैला देना जो है, वो पेट्रियाटिक काम नहीं है. तो शर्म el-शेख में भी मैंने यही कहा था कि जर्नलिस्ट बैठे थे, पाकिस्तान की गवर्नमेंट के ऑफिशियल्स बैठे थे, मैं सबके सामने इनसे कहा, देखें, हम इधर ये बता रहे हैं कि जो हम लोगों ने जो अच्छा काम किया है, मगर इधर बहुत ख़राब काम भी हुआ है, हम सबको पता है. उसका इंडिकेशन मेरी फिल्म में भी था, शर्म el-शेख वाली फिल्म में. मगर ये गुफ्तगू हम लोग कराची में और इस्लामाबाद में करेंगे, इजिप्ट में नहीं करेंगे. And I think that is the right attitude, because we have to look at how do we progress within ourselves as a nation, rather than pulling each other's legs and ruining any. तो उस नज़रिए से मैं आपको ये दिखा रहा हूँ, ठीक है जी. मेरे YouTube चैनल पे जो अगर आप मेरी फिल्म के लिंक्स में जाएंगे, वो आप डॉक्यूमेंट्री सेक्शन में चले जाएंगे. डॉक्यूमेंट्री सेक्शन के बाहर जो मेन है, ये बहुत ऑर्गेनाइज तरीके से हुआ है, बहुत जर्मन तरीके से मैंने इसको ऑर्गेनाइज किया है कैटेगरीज में. तो about 75% of my films, or maybe 60-65% are on this, but all the subjects are covered. So if you are interested in the mangroves, and if you're interested in the delta, please do go look at it.
So the first time I noticed the mangroves was in the 90s. I used to fish a lot. We used to go deep sea fishing, and I used to see a distant green line on the horizon every time we passed by to go out into the open ocean. So we started venturing close, and we discovered that this tiny green line was 45-50 feet tall. And the scale of this was so immense. And it was absolutely magical. It was the first time that I saw this forest that would sink in water.
Look at that trunk. So it takes a while for other plants to start growing around it again. But the immediate reaction is this emptying of the area. Otherwise, if you look there, now this is the natural growth of a mangrove. Very dense, lots of little shoots coming up that are growing up. And this is not natural in a mangrove forest.
Pakistan is home to one of the most successful mangrove restoration projects in the world. Globally, there is a renewed focus on safeguarding mangroves because they not only protect coastlines, they also suck more carbon out of the atmosphere per acre than any other tree. But here in Karachi, it's a different story. As rampant development, illegal logging, chemical dumping and raw sewage threaten the fragile ecosystem that lines the coast of this megacity. Tariq Alexander Qaiser is on a mission to protect these urban mangroves.
Until recently, we had 7 species. Previously, we had more. But we had 7 species of mangroves. 3 went extinct. 95% of the mangrove that we have that is left with us is the Avicenna marina. It's just this incredible tree where it will not only absorb the carbon and sequester carbon in the soil in itself and its roots, it will tolerate and absorb and lock into the soil the metals from the tanneries, the chromiums, the leads, all the dyeing chemicals that are coming out of our textile factories. It can deal with the organic toxins that we are pouring out because Karachi does not treat its sewage. And the incredible tonnage of waste is dumped into the ocean every day. And this tree is able to take it and absorb it.
In recent years, Qaisar started using the power of social media to spread awareness.
So I would send the videos out on WhatsApp to about 1,800 or 1,900 people with the request that please forward it. And it got moved around a lot. So it went to a lot of the officials who were in charge of forestry, who were in charge of the provincial government, and to people who in the federal government. People who were in a position to do something about it. And to my greatest surprise, they did. There was at times within the hour response and instructions given to try and stop the cutters, to send the security and the forestry department people out to the places. Responses of the forests will be protected.
What are the mangroves? Mangroves are the plants that grow in the junction of sea and the river water, like in a brackish water.
An architect by trade, Qaisar helped design this mangrove ecosystem exhibit at the newly opened Magnify Science Center in Karachi.
We're the first contemporary interactive science center in Pakistan. Mangroves are not just important to the city, they're important to the coastline. And they protect the coastline, of course, from tsunamis, etc. But they are also the nursery where your crabs and prawns and fish, they spawn in the roots of those mangroves. And they, of course, provide the fish that we need for our fishing industry and to feed ourselves as well. So it's imperative that the children that come here realize the importance of what our environment is and what it is that they need to protect. They should feel a certain affinity to it.
As sea levels rise due to global warming, mangroves play an even more important role in protecting coastal cities like Karachi. The United Nations estimates that the benefits of these trees, which also provide food through their fisheries and function as tourist attractions, are worth more than $450 billion a year to the world economy.
In our country where the problems are so immense and so real, of poverty, of inequity, and on and on and on, the cutting of a tree is sad to say, but it might be of not such a great consequence, but it is. But it is, because it's the lifeline and the lifeblood of our lives out here, of the quality of lives.
We've got a small window to save these forests, and there's absolutely a chance, a good chance, to keep these for future generations. But it's a limited amount of time that we have before the forest crosses a critical threshold and they all die. So the water has to be cleaned, the city has to be responsible, the cutting needs to be sustainable, but if it's not done in balance, we lose the forest. If it's done in balance, we will sustain both people and these trees. And we all depend on each other. And at the end of the day, we are all food for each other. It's a continuing journey. And मैं समंदरी आदमी हूँ, sailing करता हूँ, तो sailing की एक terminology है tacking and jibing. अगर आपको एक रुख सामने से आ रही है और रुकावट दे रही है, तो आपके पास चॉइस होती है कि आप हेड ऑन लग जाएं, मगर रुक जाते हैं। तो आगे बढ़ने के लिए हम ऐसे घूमते हैं। इसका 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 लफ्ज जो है वो टैकिंग कहलाता है। दूसरा वाला जैबिंग है, मगर टैकिंग जो होती है वो आगे बढ़ने का है, मगर डायगनली बढ़ते हैं। आजकल मैं थोड़े बहुत टैक पे हूँ, आगे बढ़ने की कोशिश तो कर रहा हूँ, मगर हवा सामने से आ रही है, बिकॉज अब कटाई ख़त्म नहीं हुई, कराची के जंगलात में बढ़ी हुई है। एलोकेशन जो है मैंग्रोव की ज़मीनों की बिल्कुल उरूज पे है, और वो अगर डिमार्केट होके किसी के पास पर्ची उसके पास पहुंची तो उधर के पेड़ कटने ही कटने हैं। और Karachi has lost too much of its mangrove cover because the whole of phase 8, phase 6, right up to the higher areas, the whole of Clifton used to be mangroves. अलेक्जेंडर द ग्रेट के टाइम पे उनके जनरल जो हैं वो जब उनको उठाने आए थे किश्तियों के जरिए, वो कराची के करीब पहुंचे, जहां हम अभी कमाड़ी है, कमाड़ी के अंदर मुड़े, जहां बोटिंग बेसन है उधर से गुजरे, जहां गाजी साहब का मज़ार है उसके पीछे वाली साइड से, शहर वाली साइड से किश्तियों में वो गुजरे, जहाँ मरीना क्लब बना हुआ है, जहाँ मलीर नदी का पानी बारिशों में समंदर में गिरता है, वहाँ से मुड़े। और इब्राहिम हैदरी का भी मैप देख लीजिएगा तो ये होगा कि पूरा डीएचए क्लिफ्टन के पीछे से अलेक्जेंडर की किश्तियां जो हैं वो अंदर से घूमते हुए गई पास्ट बम्बोर। उधर कहा जाता है कि एक शहर होता था दबील, आई कांट प्रोनाउंस इट प्रॉपर्ली, उधर तक गए रफली, और उधर से पैगाम पहुंचवाया कि हम आपको समंदर से नहीं उठा सकते, बलोचिस्तान से आपके कई ट्रूप्स को उठाएंगे, आप जमीन लैंड रूट से निकले। तो ये 350 बीसी की बात है। उसके बाद से हमारा शहर बढ़ता गया, बढ़ता गया, बढ़ता गया, और पेड़ कटते गए, और पेड़ की इन मैंग्रोव्स की जो वैल्यू है 1800s, early 1900s तक भी कुछ नहीं थी. Even the Britishers insisted on having them cut. There is a very famous court case where the villagers put a case against the British government, saying that we don't want to cut our mangroves because they provide us nourishment and fisheries. And the British government, the British courts decreed that the mangroves will be cut because the local villagers have no rights on them because it's crown property. So, I mean, this is in the 1800s. And the delta started degrading when we started building barrages, when they started building the barrages and reduced the flow. Two things happened. Sweet water reduced, which is at a high point at this point in time. And consequently, the silt that would flow into the delta and build up the islands, because the islands get eroded by ocean water and the moving estuary waters, weren't getting replenished. So our delta is shrinking and the salt water is encroaching into the lands. There was so much sweet water that in the 1400s, the Talpurs had rice paddies in Keti Bandar. Keti Bandar is right on the ocean. It's completely saline right now. And you know, there's an entire community that hasn't been, and a culture that hasn't been as well documented as it should have been. And hopefully, I think some people are trying to work on it, of the Talpur era and the Delta, because there were thriving cities and islands and forts, which we know of and we visit. And there's entire sunken archaeological sites in this delta. So the history is very old, very deep, but the degradation has started a long, long time ago. At this point, it's a very complicated thing because the people who cut are very poor, and they get 200 rupees a month. Okay. How many rupees is that a kilo, Murad? Can anyone convert it? It's something ridiculous. It's 20 rupees or 25 rupees a kilo, something like this, of wood, mangrove wood. And it's used substantially for tandoors. Used to be used a lot for barbecue. And most of the roads in Karachi are made from mangrove wood. And it's just the most incredibly sad and ridiculous thing to lose an asset that keeps your health and the environment clean for this sort of a purpose. So education becomes paramount, conversation on this becomes paramount, and what I would like to request you all, one of the reasons I do take the time out to do these things, is that I would like you to think about it, and if you feel inspired or motivated enough, then talk about it. Talk about it in as many forums. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's Murad. That is, I'm happy to be part of this forum here, and this is the reason I would like you to feel it. It doesn't matter whether you feel my pain or not. My pain is inconsequential. It is very painful. I come out of those forests crying many times, and it takes me a few days. I bounce back very fast because life isn't about beating your chest. It is about doing something that you feel is necessary, that you're motivated to. So, I hope I can pass on these emotions in some degree. Now, thank you. What I'd like to do is I'd like to show the documentary. I've done it in English and I've done it in Urdu. Both are on my YouTube channel. Everything. Pardon? No, not the Time magazine. Time magazine one was done by them, so it's only done in English. But my 30-minute documentary is in Urdu and in English. So please feel free to move it on. Anything on my YouTube channel is open source. Send it out, share it, show it, talk about it. It's a resource that's been put onto YouTube for research purposes. I've categorized it made for children, my site, so it's non-monetizable, and I don't really care about that. So that is not my motivation. My motivation is purely information placement, so that people like you, if you're interested, pick it up, use it, send it out. So now this documentary is in 3 parts. We are going to play it in parts. It's one series. In 10 minutes, when I tell you, then just pause it. Then we'll have a conversation on it. We'll have question and answers every single one if you want. Okay, please. So I have to acknowledge that the Khan University funded this for their series Voices from the Roof of the World. This was done in conjunction with brilliant director Andrew Tack, and he called me and said, "Okay, look, I know you make films and I know you've been doing this work. Will you listen to me?" So I said, "Andrew, I'm going to work with you for almost a year." So this one took about 8 months. I'm going to work with you for and telling me what you like and don't like and telling me off and I hope praise me. I said, is that true? He said, yes. I said, and you're going to be paying me. So I'm considering this a master class that I'm going to get paid for. So yes, of course, I'm going to listen to you. So it was done in conjunction with him. It was filmed on a shoe budget because I finance this work on my own, and so I hope you enjoy it. But it's my first large full documentary. We've worked on several others now, but some of them are on the YouTube. So please, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take something out of it. Jakub, every 10 minutes, roughly, I will indicate when to stop.
Peaks to its valleys downstream, how people and wildlife are
This is the voice of Christina Anandpur.
coping with climate change. Voices from the roof of the world.
This enchanted space exists just outside Karachi. It's a vast forest of incredible beauty, hiding many surprises. A place uninhabited by people and full of life. Not many people work here. Fewer come to visit. I'm Tariq Alexander Qaiser, and over the last decade I've visited this magical place almost every Saturday. This is my habitat of comfort. It's a place I love, treasure, and know well. Now I would like to share what I have seen exploring Karachi's very special forest. We are standing here in the middle of a creek in Bundle Island. These are Karachi's mangrove forests. They're lush, they're healthy, and they grow profusely. We still have them with us. But for how long? Because all is not well, and they are being cut. They're being cut at a rate that will deplete this forest very, very soon. The destruction of this forest will have ecological impacts that will reach beyond our generation. It is illegal to cut these forests, but it's still being done. And the reason is that the laws are in place, but their enforcement is very weak, and the monitoring is virtually non-existent. We can't afford to lose these wonderful forests, but they are being cut. And I do not know how long we will have them within the neighborhood of Karachi. Within sight of the city, we enter into these mangrove channels, and the birds are perched on trunks of cut trees. They observe us with caution, egrets, herons, and they squawk warnings and go back to their business of fishing and hunting. Ismail, our boatman, has spent his childhood crabbing within these forests. He points out the damage inflicted by the mangrove cutting business over here.
बहुत से पेड़ कट रहे जा रहे हैं, ये चेंसों से, कुल्हाड़ियों से ये पेड़ भी कट के मार्केट में बेचा गया है। हम बचपन में आते थे जंगलों में, तो इधर क्रेप्स ज़्यादा होते थे। अब यहाँ पे इसमें आलूदगी ज़्यादा हो गई है और इन जंगलों में अंदर से बहुत खोखले हो गए हैं।
But there are still almost pristine sections of forests left. And the Brahmani kite,
shows us the way in. The waterways are vast and unknown to us, but an egret takes over from the kite to guide us. The channels meander and twist, expand and constrict. Here old and tall mangroves are still standing. We skirt around them into a dead-end lagoon. A heron flies under the arch of trees, and again we follow, moving deeper and deeper into this hidden world between land and water. The tunnels turn into endless channels, leading into even more pools covered by canopies of trees. We push ahead until the boat cannot move forward. Here light filters through the mangroves like sharp shards. And my most magical memory on this very special day. It's a moment I shared with a Brahmani kite. But there's so many other stories this forest and the old trees can tell. We all understand the benefit of mangroves. They protect us from tsunamis and sea surges. They provide shelter to fishermen and villagers on the coastline. They absorb even more carbon than the rainforests do. They are a nursery for fisheries. They're so vital for marine health. Our delta has been the very reason that our shores and our coastline have been so prolific in the production of fish. Taimur Mirza is with me. He's a conservationist, a photographer, and a core member of our team.
You know, the fact that this forest exists just adjacent to Karachi is astounding.
Exactly. And a large part of the population, Karachi, this concrete monstrosity, is totally unaware of it.
Absolutely.
And these islands out here on the windward side, and they provide that essential oxygen that is needed in the highly polluted industrial areas of Landi and Korangi. And
all over Landi, Korangi and the rest of Karachi.
Yeah, the rest of Karachi.
But yet, this last section of these massive forests are at risk.
Yes, they are, definitely. The reason behind is the poverty, extreme poverty, lack of education, no infrastructure, no civic agencies involved in protecting these vital resources.
And the specter of future development.
Exactly.
The Avicena marina is the dominant mangrove species here. They grow and live in brackish and saltwater tides for 80 to 100 years, developing into contorted shapes beyond our imagination. In early spring, mangroves bloom with 1 million flowers. A golden halo surrounds the dark leaves, and a wonderful fragrance permeates the forest. Fresh leaves seem to glow in olive green, speckled with grains of white salt. The tiny flower is just half a centimeter across, but somehow it's still radiant, full of the wonderful life growing within.
Almost right. The seeds quickly grow into plump, almond-shaped fruit, about 1 inch long, before they fall from the tree into the waters below. The skin sheds, the fruit opens, and the stems sprout. Countless numbers float into the sea before they wash up on mudflats or sandbanks. The lucky seeds will root in the wet mud and survive the trampling and not be torn out by shrimp nets. If we are fortunate, these tiny seeds will grow into forest that is now under threat.
Some days, the sound of birds is drowned by the sound of chainsaws and axe hits.
Many times we come across boatloads of timber. Commercial cutting is illegal. Foraging by people of coastal communities for personal use is not. However, the distinction between the two is blurry,
An alternative source of fuel for these communities must be found to prevent disaster in the making. The pace of mangrove cutting has accelerated over the last 2 years. The trees are felled and left in the water. When they have aged and appear to have fallen naturally, they are removed and later sold. The wood is sold at a cheap price. Those who collect it are poor and paid little. For those who organize the cutting and the sale of mangroves, the wood is virtually free. Waqas works on our boat, and when asked about the cutting of the forest, he says,
ये जंगल की लकड़ियाँ बिकती भी है बाज़ारों में भी और फैक्ट्रियों में भी, और जिसके घर पे गैस और दूसरी चीज़ें नहीं होती है तो ये लकड़ियाँ इसी इस्तेमाल में करते हैं, जलाते भी है, वो कोयले बना के बेचते भी है। हमारे घर में तो फिर भी फ़िलहाल गैस है, अगर जिनके घर में गैस नहीं है तो वो क्या करेंगे?
The business of burning mangroves to fire industrial burners and making charcoal or grilling barbecue needs to be stopped.
I'll tell you when to start.
It can be done.
Relax. No, thoda sa, almost there. Just continue.
I stand as witness that these forests are being cut.
There's quite a few questions in there, but so I'll give a broad scope answer. The ecosystems are changing, but then change is the only constant in nature. And nature and the evolutionary forces will adjust to the circumstantial situations around. The water has reduced. Because the water has reduced, silt has reduced, so the composition has changed. The cities have provided a different source of water, very polluted, toxic water. But the Avicenna marina, one of the plants, is capable of handling it. So it's remained. So yes, so the change has happened, and the ecological degradation is happening, but nature is compensating. But nature's pace is a much longer term and a slow process. Humans, because of the volume of people and the population right now on the coast near the cities is so high that the natural adjustment cannot keep pace with the onslaught of human abuse. So sewage comes in, chemicals, metals, organic and chemical toxins are being poured out. They are getting embedded into the soil, so the soil composition is changing. So I wouldn't recommend eating any crabs near. I wouldn't recommend eating any crabs that have been caught from near the cities. Most certainly not the oysters or the clams from here, because they are very toxic. So yes, downstream, the onslaught of pollution and population density and irresponsible presence of humans has led to a degradation of the environment and a degradation of the animals that live here. A lot of the seabirds shouldn't be eaten, especially the local ones, like cormorant cannot be eaten. Marina Club people caught one last week and tried to eat it. And just after they slaughtered it, poor thing, the guy who slaughtered it broke out in boils in his arm. Thank God I happened to be there for dinner, so they told me very proudly, we are making batakh bana rahe hain hum log samandri. तो मैंने कहा कौन सी बत्तख, तो एक वो कॉर्मोरेंट की तस्वीर दिखा दी, तो एकदम से उनको रोका, तो बहुत लोगों के पेट बचा दिया मैंने। अगर वो एक बेचारा परिंदा मर गया, उसको उन्होंने समुद्र में फेंक दिया पेट में। तो just to illustrate कि yes, the environment is really degrading fast. but it can bounce back. There's another thing that I'm sure you're familiar with is the fungal growth, the mycelium, the fungal networks. The mycelium is what keeps the fungus and the mycelium keeps these soils really healthy. But if you kill a mother tree, a big mangrove, or mother mangrove, then you run the risk of allowing the mycelium that it has generated to start dying out. And when the mycelium dies out, then the soil dies. And so for the fungus to regrow takes a much longer time. And unfortunately, I have seen evidence on Bundle Island of mycelium dying. It's very simple way to see it is when you walk and your foot gets embedded into the mangrove, into the mud flat. You pull your foot out, the mud will not smell. But when the mycelium is dying, there's a smell of death, there's a smell of rot. And so recently, when I've gone and photographed some older trees, the cut trees, and I came back from their trunk, my boots were really smelling. Moth ki baas hoti hai. It does exist. So I don't know. So yes, of course. I think the answer to everything you said is yes and yes and yes and yes and yes. And in the documentary also, this is highlighted. Okay. This is the problem. So what does that indicate? I mean, that indicates a failure of governance and a failure of caring for the people. That's very important to highlight. I think let's continue this.
Tidal land. And they are deep. Seawater pours in twice a day, sometimes rising up to a height of 13 feet. 13 feet. Within 6 hours, these tides will recede. Water will flow out, and the same place will dry. Another 6 hours, and the waters will rise back up again. This is an intertidal land.
When the tides recede, the Kurangi creeks reveal vast stretches of mud flats. This area is classified as wastelands by land authorities. However, it's anything but that. Life is vibrant here. Let me introduce you to some of its residents. Mud flats come alive when one is still and calm. Perhaps the most charismatic resident is the mud skipper. They eat their way through mud to make and live in deep submerged tunnels. They carry oxygenated water in cheek pouches, keep tails and bodies wet and keep moving. Ever vigilant, belligerent, territorial, aggressive, curious, but cautious, always watching, always ready to jump. And they can jump 1.2 meters.
There is life and death here. So many species and so many life forms, seen only when we look. Every centimeter of the mud is alive, on the surface and below. There is so much below. Below the surface is a network of tunnels, homes and highways, an ecosystem that has been able to cope to the onslaught of pollution and abuse. This is a bloodworm. We use it as bait, and the habitat needs it as a vital aerator of anaerobic soil.
Sometimes even shrimp jump into our boat. When tides recede, shrimps get washed into the mudbank channels, and when our boat enters these shallows, they panic and try to escape, exploding out of the water. These waters are prolific. The shrimps grow fast, 4 months to become large, and the catch is still substantial, even close to the city. This is because of the mangroves, all in the shadow of Karachi and its uncontrolled development, excessive pollution and unsustainable practices.
जब जंगल होते हैं उसमें छोटे झींगे होते हैं, छोटी मछली होती है, उसके अंदर चलते हैं। जब वो बंद कर देगा, पानी सूख जाएगा नहीं, फिर वो जो मछली मर जाता है। मछली झींगे जो है बेजात जो हो रही है ये जंगल के अंदर होते हैं। जंगल के हिसाब से ये जंगल काट रहे हैं तो वो जो नहीं पानी रुक जाता है, खींच वो जो नहीं किचरे हो जाता है। कोई ऐसे बंदे हैं जो इनका रोके जो जंगल काटते हैं।
कैसा रोका जा सकता है यार?
गवर्नमेंट तो है, गवर्नमेंट उनका हल नहीं है जो उन्हें बारिश के हवा के लिए ये जंगल रोकते हैं। हवा तेज आता है, तूफान आता है, इनको रोकते हैं। पूरा किश्ती भर के ऊपर लेके जाते शहर में भेजते हैं।
दिन में कितनी किश्ती आती होगी?
6-7 किश्ती 10 किश्ती निकालते हैं
हर रोज
50-20 निकालते हैं। वो खतरनाक उनके पास मशीन है सामने वाला पूरा काट है। ये इनको मेहरबानी करे हुकूमत उनके पीछे लग जाए, जो ये लकड़ी काटते जंगल काटते हैं इनको रोक दे कच्चे को।
In spite of the destruction of these mangroves, some of the migrating birds have been returning, and somehow the ecosystems have been coping with the pollution. For me, the most spectacular is the flamingo. The resident and migratory population was large. They left Karachi's islands last year due to mangrove cutting and poaching. Some cormorants stayed and others returned by the thousands. The cormorants feed off the waters of these estuaries, but the flamingos feed on the shores of these very disturbed mangroves. But for how long can these natural habitats compensate? How long before we lose these visitors and residents of Karachi? The flamingos I photographed here in 2018 did not return in 2020. Today's journey continues in Dodarya. We head past the fishing community of Ibrahim Haidri and reach the relatively new Karangi Fish Harbour, lying in the foreground of the very old communities of Chashma and Redigot. Life on these creeks has been documented and recorded from the time of Alexander the Great, when his geographer general was sent ahead to explore this delta. Working dhows and sailboats of traditional vernacular design still ply these waters, and just across our crowded urban city lie our islands, our hidden mangrove forests. The creek is wide, but in the distance the mainland developments are still visible. The lagoons are vast and shallow, still productive, but overfished. Captain Salim had to sell his own fishing trawler. He tells us why.
पहले तो काफ़ी मच्छियाँ थी हमारे पास, तो बहुत होती थी मच्छियाँ। चारे के पीछे मच्छियों के चारा है ही नहीं अपने पास, और मच्छियाँ भी बिल्कुल बहुत दूर दूर चली गई हैं। तो जंगलात में ये अंडे बच्चे देते ये फिर बाहर निकलते तो सारा उसमें जाले में उसमें आ जाते, तो उसको बढ़ने जंगलात तो समझो ख़त्म होते ही जा रहे हैं आस्ते आस्ते, सारा समझो ख़त्म हो गई है जंगलात।
Men walk on mud. They hunt crabs, collect shells, housing life, and seek clams, razor clams. The sun sets on these once famous oyster beds. Karachi. So much that has suffered because of progress. The struggle to live is real, and commerce carries on, all in the shadow of development.
So what I'd like to show up close is if you look at the two tones of mud.
We sail over intertidal mudflats to reach here, and if we linger too long when tides turn and recede, we end up walking on mud. Vast stretches of mudflats, revealed only when the tides are low. The scale never ceases to astound me. And no matter how many times I have done it before, I haven't gotten over that pleasure of pulling my boat into deeper water when grounded. We spend our time here recording and photographing. These vistas and habitats are so full of life, just hiding out of sight. At varying tides. Exiting the island is now through the very familiar creeks, conscious of tide, time, and the flow of water. It tells us when to leave. This is the same channel at mid-tide. Today the water will drop here by 5 more feet. High tide at one of my favorite lagoons, and this is the same lagoon when the tides recede. The silence allows us to experience life in a mangrove forest, clicking, bubbling, snapping. The sounds of air, mud, and water as it's pulled by the moon's gravity, a tiny bit of earth responding to being influenced by universal forces. The low tides rise and recede twice a day. I love experiencing the low tides here. But the low tide also exposes the assault on this forest and exposes the old stumps of old, large mangroves and freshly felled trees. I often leave these forests in sadness, but leave even more determined to make sure they're protected in a future nature reserve. Our journey to understand how important mangroves are ends in Karachi's jungle, a city without a master plan.
Can you pause it?
Karachi.
Okay. So this is a section on the ecology of the forest. The next section is on the relationship of the city and the thing. So one of the reasons to make this documentary, Sana, I think, the one who asked me the last question, right? No, the lady is sitting behind you. So the answer to your question is, I mean, what am I doing about it? I am telling the story about it. I am advocating and creating an advocacy for things that need to be put right. It's a very complicated thing. The people who are cutting are very poor, and there's a real need. But if you do the economics of it, at 200 rupees a month, okay, 20 rupees a kilo, let's assume, the cost of the fuel that it will take to carry this wood from the islands about 6 miles to the market, and then to pay for the cutters, to pay for the loaders and the boat, is way more than the cost of what you will learn from the wood. It's a matter of doing the math. So the cutter and the transporter is making this pittance, it's birdseed, and someone is financing it. So the question is who, how, why? There are many answers to it. So I want you to think about it. And I want you to think about complicity. And I want you to think about your own, all of our own involvement in this. Ignorance is also complicity. Not thinking things through, not having critical thought and analysis is also complicity. So the reason to make these documentaries and have these conversations is to raise these questions, exactly what you asked, Betty. And the solutions are very difficult, but unless enough people ask questions and enough red flags are raised, nothing is going to happen. Because all said and done, the cutting of a tree and the loss of a forest is of a very low priority to the people who might be able to do something about it. And then the other question that you have to, this is this little cliche-ish saying, okay, if a tree falls in a forest and no one saw it, did it really fall? So if a tree is cut and a forest disappears and no one knew that the forest existed, did the forest really get cut? And when there is no forest, the land, which is already allocated and designated as wasteland by the land department, wasteland. The mangroves are designated as wastelands. If wastelands have no visible signs of plant life, okay, rather than just shrubs, then it is dead. But is it really dead? Because the real life in an intertidal zone, this is an intertidal zone, is in the subsurface. It's in the mud. It's in the bacteria. There's many more bacteria in there than there are humans on this earth. The fungus that sustains life, that helps trees and plants communicate with each other. So these are not barren wastelands. These are vibrant ecosystems. They are valuable in any habitation for humans because they balance out the ecosystem. One of you asked about the balance. The microorganisms are the fundamentals for maintaining and creating balance. And if you cut the trees, then you disturb this. If you disturb it, you will start killing the mycelium. And Bundle Island is on the threshold of the pivotal point where the fungus and mycelium will cascade and die. So I think let's start with the next section.
It is a mega city. Some 20 million people live here within dense concrete, largely devoid of trees, coping with a high demand for growth, modernity, and housing great disparity in quality of life. This is an urban sprawl without master planning and managed by 18 independent municipalities that don't coordinate with each other.
And this chaos translates into this.
All the water has to be supplied by tankers.
Exactly.
And there's no gas.
There's hardly any infrastructure of electricity.
There are power breakdowns that are constant. It is a city in chaos.
Oh yes, definitely it is. And below this rubble that you see in this so-called storm drain is raw sewage water.
And the solid waste that's floating on top, including the sewage, is dumped on a daily basis into the ocean. And this needs to stop.
this solid waste and the sewage have to be treated and removed before it is allowed to reach the sea. Karachi's wastewater treatment plants exist but do not function. Some 7,000 tons of waste are dumped into the ocean every day. Even medical waste washes up on the beaches. More than 400 million gallons per day of untreated sewage is dumped into our waterways. There are times that the very visible
Pass and still rising. The shoreline also awaiting ecological responsibility.
This is the Kurangi Creek, lying on the southeast of Karachi. Our journey starts from this area called Do Darya, two rivers, the confluence of two creeks on the extreme west of the mighty Indus River Delta. This is the true edge of Delta, an expansive Kurangi Creek. It stretches east toward the Pitti Creek, the approach channel of the Port Qasim Authority.
We have been exploring these hidden forests on Karachi's islands, the intertidal Kapriawala Island and Bundle Island. They flood and empty your water twice a day. The 13 feet of flooding tides have created incredible habitats and ecosystems. Mangroves, mudflats, sandbanks. All interconnected, interdependent, and so very vital to Karachi's well-being.
Pakistanis are doing incredible work in replanting mangroves on denuded lands. The Forest Department and a host of organizations are very actively working on replenishing the delta. The work is truly admirable and commendable.
The collaboration between them and the private sector is very commendable, and it is showing impact. However, the areas that desperately need replantation have few sources of sweet water, and the growth of mangroves there is slow. On the other hand, the forests on Karachi's islands adjacent to the Kurangi Creek still have some of the largest and oldest of mangrove trees. Some of these have not been cut. These need to be protected and preserved for future generations. When heading out to sea, I would notice a distant green line. The first time that I came here, I fell in love with these spaces. I have seen these mangroves in a pristine state, and I can see them disappearing, being destroyed. There are many parts here that are still healthy. However, plastic, trash, the city's waste, and commercial cutting of trees have had an impact. There's still enough left, and it is worth preserving. Pakistan can join the countries that have pledged at the recent Climate Change Summit to end deforestation by 2030. I would like to emphasize very, very strongly that it is a mistake. It's a huge mistake for us to allow the removal of these very necessary forests and trees. It will impact the future generations and the quality of life in our city for a very, very long time. There's only one certain way to protect the beauty of these critical forests. It is to create a nature reserve on our islands, a marine protected area. A place that is still so alive could continue for the benefit of all, where plants and animals can thrive and an already existing symbiotic relationship between man and nature can be sustained. I hope we don't miss this chance for our benefit and the generations that will follow us. This grove of trees was cut in the spring of 2021, and this is what they looked like when I photographed them just a few months earlier, enjoying them in all their spinous splendor. Now sadly, I photographed the remaining trunks one last time. It's always so difficult to lose old friends. But the natural world has a tremendous capacity to rejuvenate, and the forest is trying to regrow. But it won't succeed if the clear cutting is not stopped and a sustainable harvest is not enforced. Even the hardiest forest will not survive.
Temur was, still is, my best of friends and my permanent companion in the mangroves. And we worked seamlessly together. I would handle video and wide angles, and he would handle mid to zoom. So we each had 2, sometimes 3 cameras each. And so if I was pointing somewhere, Temur's 200, 400, 500 mm lens would point there. So I would take the wide angle and the motion shots, and he'd take the detail. So then when I edit myself, so when I edit, then I would take his high resolution detail shot and pan with my wide angle, and then zoom in with his close up into the eye of, say, a bird or the claw of the crab. And we were working in a point that if Temur's lens was pointing somewhere, I knew mine had to be, and if mine was, then his would point there. And we were doing this without talking. So it's 5-6 hour trips, not saying anything. Companionship. So I miss him tremendously, and I know he's known to all of us. If you ever use a fabric called the Fabric Project, that is Temur's project. Temur Mirzai built up that project. You're probably sitting on his fabric on these chairs. You're probably sitting on it. We used to have in the 1800s about 8 known species. Before that, I think there were more species of mangroves. And when the river started drying out, then the mangroves that required less saline water, they started dying out. And the 8 became 7 very quickly. Then we lost 3 more from the 1800s to 1970s, 60s. We lost 3 more species, also because of the changing water profile of the Indus River outflow and the composition of the soil. The 4 that were left, 2 almost died out because, again, salinity, and they died out in the areas near the cities because they couldn't handle the toxins. The Agrasias and the Syrops, both of them disappeared. So 2 were left in great abundance. The Avicenna marina, which is about 98%, about 1.5% is the Rhizophorum monochata, which is the traditional picture of the mangrove with the roots, the aerial roots, coming down, these tango jaisi roots of the Avicenna marina is the one that can actually grow very tall or spread out, but it has what are called aerial roots. And watch my fingers. these are breathing roots that come out, little fingers on the ground. Now, the Avicenna marina is a magic tree, and it's called Avicenna for a reason, because it's got a lot of medicinal properties. Because of our क्या कहते हैं, the old Islamic doctor and researcher and medical Avicenna, because of him, it's named after him. And it's not us Muslims who named that plant Avicenna marina. Okay, the Avicenna of the marine environment. And because, you can take its leaves, and if you have a cut, or if a camel has a cut, you take its leaves, crush it up, and bind it onto the wound. The antibiotic properties of the leaf actually aid in healing. The leaves themselves are also medicinal for coughs and stuff. The bark has a tannin in it. But the most important quality of this is that it will survive in the most toxic of soils. It will survive in pure salt water. It will survive in pure sweet water also. What it requires is this tidal flow, water going up and water going down. So sometimes it needs air because of these aerial roots. And sometimes it needs to be inundated in water. But it's a magic tree, and because it is able to survive in the onslaught of pollution and our human abuse of our cities, and believe you me, it's very serious. It's abuse, because if you walk around too much in it, you start getting rashes and itches, and people who work a lot in the mangroves without protection on their feet actually carry around big bags of lotions and creams. I haven't been afflicted to that great a degree, but yes, I also have an entire counter full of creams for these rashes on your feet and legs. But and that's because of our polluted soils and what we pump into the water. So what's very important is that we need to create treatment plants, sewage treatment plants. We need to revitalize and reactivate them. We need to stop. We need to do solid waste management. If you go, I used to go scuba diving, and every year the trash was a little further out, a little further out, a little further out. It's very upsetting. The UN report has classified Karachi's oceans as dead sea. It's by no means dead is dead. Arya. Death is dead. But by no means is it actually dead as yet. It's still been able to survive. But we need to clean this up, and if we don't, it's you can take responsibility for your children's health in the future. But so ये फर्क तो पड़ रहा है. इसका क्या करना है, देखें. Sorry, I got carried away. I got lost away from your question, Mafi. Can you repeat it if I haven't answered it? Okay. This is something that it's not about passion. It's very painful for me to see, and it's something that I cannot just walk away from, and I will not walk away from. But I'm not too sure whether I will succeed or not. But the fact that I have been, it has been suggested that I reduced my field trips down last year, suggested to me by 2 independent people. I look at it. They say, Tariq, it's probably not that safe for you now. The fact is, I consider that as a point of success, because the information has gotten to enough places that is troubling. So I am still having conversations, I'm still writing, and I'm publishing books on it, working on books on it. and I am putting out an oral history and planting seeds in people's minds. And that's what I'm doing here with you. I would like to plant these seeds of mangroves in your mind. They can't. Firstly, when one is self-funded, okay, then one is limited in the amount of money one can spend. No? This is completely self-funded. My architectural practice finances this thing. Each trip can average, each Saturday trip can average in the cost of about 50 to 70,000 rupees. Right, and so yes, so this is one limitation that I have. The second limitation I have is that I am focusing on the areas near Karachi. A necessity and by choice, because I can only work on those areas in which I have regular and limitless reach. And it's still very expensive, but mashallah, the office can finance it, and we were happily doing it. The third limitation is that these areas where I am working as a civilian, so does that answer your question? And if I ask for permission to go in there, firstly, there is no authority that we know who has authority to give you permission. So if I ask for permission, I will not get the permission. But if I go in and I can come out, it's Pakistan's land, I'm allowed to be where I want to be. As long as I don't take photographs of naval installations, which I don't. And as long as I don't fly a drone, then there isn't there. But if anyone has asked permission to document the area, it's denied. So the only time I went in officially with permission was for the government for the COP 27 film. The thing is, they earn their living, these are fishing communities, they earn their living from fishing, crabbing, shrimping. They have permission, which I talked about in the film, they have permission to forage for the dead wood and fallen wood, because the mangrove is only about, I've seen marinas only 60 to 80 years life, so the trees die. And when they die, the dead wood. So people cut, the cutters have the wood cut, leave it for a month, and when it looks like old dead wood, they take it out. The cost of the wood is not, the price of the sale of the wood is not viable to actually cut it. So they're not earning their livelihood out of it. Okay, there is enough wood there for them to burn in their kitchens for when the communities are small. But when you take a larger city and you fill a tandoor with the mangrove wood, then obviously this is not for the community itself. So the foraging for the leaves on the lower branches is an acceptable practice, because there's a concept called this syntropic farming, where you cut the lower branches of a tree and the tree energizes and grows faster. It gets into a perception of stress, and then it draws its leaves faster, but it has to be done low, and that has been an ancient tradition for hundreds of years. The collection of the dead wood is also an acceptable thing. The fallen branches, the dead branches, there's always a lot of dead branches. But cutting a tree from the trunk is never something that a local indigenous community will want to do, because their entire knowledge of living with these forests, and these deltic communities have lived with the forest. They have the knowledge, because there's been such a lot of economic and climate migration over the last few decades that a lot of this knowledge is being lost. So saving the forest is not cutting the livelihood of the fisherman community. It is actually enhancing and perpetuating a tradition, a life, an economic activity that can persist in a sustainable manner. So it's important. It's important to recognize that. And then, if you look at the economics of the wood cutting, who is actually benefiting? At the end of it, the person who sells the land for development is benefiting the most, not the woodcutter. So, who's involved in it? I don't. You know, you got to think these things very deeply. But the priority of climate and environment needs to be higher, needs to be prioritized over the need for economic development, because you are negating that for everyone. Let me clarify something. I think you need to be very clear that architecture is a very minor component to this whole issue. Okay, the problem is a lack of sensitivity to nature and appreciation of nature. आपने हिजाब पहना हुआ है या नहीं? ओके, हिजाब पहना हुआ ना, तो आप ये मेरी बात समझ जाएंगे. अब अगर आप खुदा की देन को, उनकी बरकतों को पे थूक मलेंगे ना, ठीक है, तो क्या होगा? ठीक है, और कुरान अगर आप पढ़ती हैं, so we are supposed to be custodians. Okay, Ashraful Makhlukat doesn't mean that we go and ruin everything and cut everything, because if we are the apex of creation, then on this earth, then we need to make sure that we look after it. Can you not see? Do you not understand? Do you not comprehend? Is the most important injunction in the Quran. You know, and we ignore that. Being Surah Rahman, Surah Nam, verse 26, I think, he knows of every grain of sand in the earth and of every leaf that falls. The references to nature, okay, the niche of the light in Surah Nur. The thing is that if we are not going to be part of nature and understand it and be compassionate to it, there, architecture is a very minor component. It's got nothing to do with the lack of presence of architecture. In fact, the minute you put concrete into a mangrove area, you start growing the ruination of it. We just started it. It's a very new line of thought, and I hope it doesn't become just a trend. But biocentric architecture is a very important direction that needs to be followed. But the thing is, where you already have a fungal network on the ground, then a man-made mycelium brick is not of any use there. Okay, when you already have a network of marina and rhizophora and other mangrove roots and other halophyte roots that are holding the soil together in a delta of shifting sand, then you don't need concrete. What we need is designers, architects, creators of human habitations to be sensitive to this, to be able to say, yes, this is not a place for biomimicry, but for actual botany and biology to do its work. Okay, so whereas planting a tree, okay, in comparison to putting in lines of concrete that stop the flow of water and the current so that the soil doesn't get eroded, the answer is very clear. You plant the trees that will grow there. You will not plant a coconut tree in the delta of the Indus River. You will plant a Havasina marina or another mangrove there. And why? It's very simple, because one requires sweet water and we are an arid. So as architects and planners, you will find that the favorite plant of a person doing landscape on the coastal belt is going to be a coconut palm, because श्रीलंका में उगता है. मगर श्रीलंका की रेनफॉल और हमारी रेनफॉल में जमीन आसमान का फर्क है. ठीक है जी. तो ये आर्किटेक्चर की हदूद में है या बॉटनी बायोलॉजी की हदूद में है. ठीक है. तो प्रॉब्लम ये है कि हम सब, ठीक है, हम सब की एजुकेशन जो है बहुत फॉल्टी है, बिकॉज हमें साइंसेस नहीं पढ़ाई गई और उनकी अप्रिसिएशन नहीं दी गई. आप में से कितनों ने बायोलॉजी पढ़ी है अपने मैट्रिक में. ठीक है, यू नो, सबने पढ़ी है. आई एम वेरी प्लीज्ड. ओके, सो बायोलॉजी, केमिस्ट्री, फिजिक्स बहुत अहम सब्जेक्ट्स हैं, मगर ये फॉर्मूला या किताब से रटने वाले नहीं हैं, इनकी एसेंसेस समझने वाली हैं. और अगर आप इनको अपने साथ में रखते हैं, थाम के रखें दिल में, तो आप जो डिसीजंस अपनी बिल्डिंग्स में और अपनी आप लोग आर्किटेक्ट्स बन रहे हैं, उसमें जो डिसीजंस लेंगे वो इन्फॉर्म्ड होंगे. And they'll allow you to have thought that is critically analyzed in your own minds. So this is a major fault of our educational systems. You know, अपना आर्किटेक्चर जो आप लोग प्रैक्टिस करें, आप प्लीज दूसरे डिसिप्लिन्स को ना भूलें. ठीक है जी. ये सिर्फ अना, ईगो और हवस के लिए नहीं किया जाना चाहिए. ठीक है. अनफॉर्चुनेटली हवस बहुत आ गया है सब चीज़ों में दुनिया में, दिस ईगो एंड ग्रीड. बट yeah. I understand. That's why I'm also bringing this up right here, because I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And so देखिए, you all have to, you're young, you all have to focus your lives on learning as many different disciplines as you can. And the research has never been easier. And use whatever tools you have to understand and learn, and you've got to become polymaths. Look up this word, polymath. Okay, I'm sure some of you know it, but polymaths are very important individuals, and this depth of knowledge that is required to make informed decisions is very, very there. So I got a little worried about that statement of yours where you said there's lack of architecture. Nature does fabulously well without architecture. Okay, nature in itself is a master planner over a very long period, and it's this flexible, organic, democratic, or whatever that word means, but this organic system that evolves. It's you know, whether you are a prescriptive believer in evolution or creation, they're the same. It's only the timeline that's different. So even, you know, I mean, even the Quran says 1,000 years could be of a split second. So B, if it is B, and it was, then it could have been over a few billion years, which might be a split second for some other sense ability. It's another level of discussion, but the fact is I see no difference, and it's very important to make sure that you understand many subjects. Yes, आप ये करें, आपको जो चीज रेजोनेट होती है, ठीक है, वो पिकअप करें. ठीक है, मैंने इसीलिए यूट्यूब पे डाली भी है, आप जितने को देखना चाहें देखें, पिक करें और फॉरवर्ड करें और गुफ्तगू शुरू करें. बस गुफ्तगू शुरू करें, अपने वालिदैन से कहें, अपने मामू, मामा, मामे, चाची, चाचों, सबको कहें. ठीक है, उनमें से कोई ना, आप जो कमरे में बैठे हैं, इनमें आप में से कोई ना कोई के वालिदैन या भाई बहन किसी एक ऐसे ओहदे पे होंगे जहाँ वो शायद कुछ फर्क कर सकें. तो गुफ्तगू करें, गुफ्तगू रखें, बातें करें, रिसर्च करें, अपना दिमाग इस्तेमाल करें, और अपनी सलाहियतों को पहचानते हुए उस तरीके से काम करें जो आप समझते या समझती हैं कि उसमें आप इफेक्टिव होंगी। जीने का देखो जो जादू है ना, जीने का जो जादू है वो एक चीज़ में है कि हम सब अलग-अलग हैं और हम सब की सलाहियतें बिल्कुल मुख्तलिफ हैं और सब लोग अपने अंदाज में और दयानतदारी से, दिल से काम करें, वो क्यों फ़र्क नहीं आएगा, बिल्कुल आएगा। आप लोगों ने मुझे बुलाया है, ठीक है? मैं थोड़ा-सा काम किया है, एक छोटी-सी शख्सियत हूँ मैं, ठीक है? मगर ये है कि कुछ असर पड़ा है, हाँ, बिल्कुल पड़ा है। मैं मायूस नहीं हूँ, मायूस नहीं हूँ बिकॉज़ आप लोग सवाल उठा रहे हैं, ठीक है? अभी आप लोगों को भी यही करना है कि आप लोगों से लोग सवाल उठाएँ। That is the key. That is the key thing. That's what you can do. That's the only thing I can do. Okay. One thing, Murad, I would like you all to see the film uh, that I put up it's on YouTube for the COP. It's called The Story of Survival. Okay. And its subsequent follow-up, which is called A Need for Survival. So those two together tell a really complete story. And that's actually one entire 2-hour lecture of mine. It's shorter films. They're 15 minutes each, 15, 18 minutes each, but they're about a 2-hour lecture worth. But look at those. A story of survival, that was for COP27, and a need to survive. All right, Murad, thank you. You take care. When you come to Karachi, call me.